Today, we welcome to our Global Citizenship Education Interview Series, Patrick Walsh. Patrick Walsh is a full professor and chair of International Development Studies at the University College Dublin, USD School of Politics and International Relations. He is Vice President of Education and Director of the SDG Academy, UN Sustainable Development Solution Network, SDSN. SDSN has been operating since 2012 under the auspices of the Secretary General of the United Nations. The SDSN mobilizes academia to induce partnerships to implement the UN 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development and the Paris Climate Agreement. Professor Jeffrey Sachs, University Professor, Columbia University, is the president of the SDSN. The SDSN has offices in New York, Paris, and Kuala Lumpur. So, Patrick, very welcome to the Global Citizenship Education Interview Series. It's a pleasure to have you on.
Yes, it's a joy to be with you. Thank you very much for the opportunity to talk to you.
Thank you, Patrick. So you're doing a wonderful line of work on sustainable development, the SDGs, global education, and here the first question to our guests is always a challenging one, a straightforward one. The question is, what is global citizenship education in your opinion, and how has it shaped your professional journey, particularly at the SDSN and the SDG Academy?
Yeah, no, I think that's a very good question. And I don't think it's an easy question to answer, but I'll just give you my own kind of personal views on it and how it's shaping, right? So, maybe I'll go to the end point, because we have this, our common agenda at the moment from the Secretary General from 21 to 25, and it's all about turbocharging the commitment and towards achieving the Sustainable Development by 2030, or the SDGs by 2030. And of course, he focuses on some key mobilizers or enablers or means of implementation. And within that, you'll notice there was a Transforming Education Summit, where we discussed a lot of these issues. And then we had our Summit of the Future, which we've just had. And then finally, we'll have our World Social Summit at the end, right? Now, when I first saw our common agenda and we saw a video of what it was about, it just talked about values. It just talked about having empathy and compassion to understand other people's histories and cultures, and that how we do have to have that as a basic value to engage in multilateralism. And in some ways, I'm nearly coming to the view, it's that simplicity, that global citizen education is really about understanding, other people's cultures and languages and histories to a point where you care about them as much as you might care about your neighbors or your community. Now, that seems very simple, and it is very simple. But then, of course, when you look at the work we do on let's say the MOOCs that are on edX, we have 50 courses on the SDGs that blend science, policy, practice interface to achieve the SDGs. And it's very much, part of global, what we call education for sustainable development, and transforming curriculum and content, to understand not just the economy or STEM, but also to see how that intersects with society and environment, and also, understanding governance or work on. So that's transforming education. But yes, there's a thing called Mission 4.7, which is, really the global, it's called, Sustainable Development Goal 4, Target 7, where people talk about, that's the Mission 4.7 or Goal 4.7 is the one that talks about global citizen education. That's the one that drives, that's where we talk about global citizen education. In some ways, that's true, but it also talks about the continuum of education, where caring for nature and caring for people in curriculum should start at preschool, should be in K-12, up into higher education, up into the labor force. So it's lifelong learning and a continuum of lifelong learning, right? But we do have to remember the SDGs is an intergovernmental document, and it is largely talking about how interstate we should be thinking about education and how states should be able to cooperate and work together to achieve, obviously, the SDGs. So when we're thinking of education, I think we should be thinking about global classrooms, twinning global classrooms, helping each other transform education towards education for sustainable development. But I think, again, just going back to what I said at the beginning, the point about coming away from, what we call the cognitive and non-cognitive skills and understanding the STEM or the non-STEM sort of aspects of education, it's really reducing it down to, do we care for the histories and languages and cultures of other people? And do we have empathy and compassion for them when they have problems with economy, society, or environmental issues? And I think it does come down to that. And the World Social Summit next, the final installment of our common agenda, focuses on a new world social contract, where if you're in a company as a person, or in your home, or in your government, that you actually sign up to the values of the UN Charter, and you sign up to the values of caring for people and planet outside your own jurisdiction, and that you want to work in a cooperative and multilateral way to achieving the SDGs. And that's the final installment next year. And I know that's not getting the finance together. It's not reforming education. It's not getting the technologies. It's not doing any of this. But it's really asking a basic question. It's like, are you a global citizen? Like, do you believe there is one ocean, one oxygen tent, in some senses, one food system, and that you are a part of nature and a part of this planet, and that you are actually integrating with each and every person on this planet, and that you should care about that in each and every one of your actions?
Absolutely. And we keep focusing on humans, and we are much less considerate towards non-humans. So it's very important to advance this discussion as well when it comes to ethical values. And I want to ask you a follow-up question. How can higher education foster global citizenship to advance the UN Sustainable Development Goals based on your experiences?
Well, when we walked into the Transforming Education Summit in 2022 under the General Assembly, what we saw at the gate was a survey, I think it was UNICEF did it, of 12-year-olds, I think, across the world. And what they did was just ask, can you understand this paragraph in your own language? So it's literacy. And unfortunately, only 33% could understand a simple paragraph in their own language. So this is not a good thing. I thought when we were in the Millennium Development Goals, I thought literacy potentially was a thing of the past. But unfortunately, literacy, participation in school is still a big problem. And then we have these studies on PISA scores and achievement in maths and science as 15-year-olds. And again, there's been studies that have looked at that. And even in a country like America, 25% of the kids just don't have an appropriate level of maths or science. And then it gets to 90% in some other countries. That is not a good starting point for even STEM education, for what we used to, like, even those who are, we want education to incorporate environmental and social issues. We want education to have global citizenship values. We're starting behind the curve. And of course, one of the outcomes of the Transforming Education Summit, which was emphasized by Gordon Brown and Jeffrey Sachs and a lot of people at the summit, was we are not spending enough in education. Like, when you look at the requirements of, say, 4 to 5% of GDP or 25% of your public spend on education, a lot of countries are failing on this. And even the poor countries, because their tax base is so small, if they were to spend that amount of money, they wouldn't really achieve very much. So there is actually a big responsibility to have a global fund for education. And I think it's a human right that children should go to school and they should get some form of education. So even before we can talk about global citizen education, I think we really have to work hard on having the funding and the priority of every kid going to school. Now, there are there are initiatives like here in Dubai, we have the third World OER Summit alongside the Knowledge Summit, and people are thinking about how we can get education resources out to libraries and schools, how we can use technology to help give access to knowledge and to schooling. But of course, though, the big question you're asking is what's the content? Like, are you just teaching the necessary, like maths and science and reading and writing? And how much can you give of understanding how you coexist with nature and society? And how much values can you inject into having compassion for people, you know, outside your own just jurisdiction, and as you say, nature in general. So I'd say it's quite bad news if we're being fair about analyzing how much access people have to global citizen education. I think in poorer countries, they can't even get access to traditional education or to schools at all. And then in the rich countries, very few have actually transformed their education systems to be STEM, non-STEM, cognitive, non-cognitive, and to inject values for respect and compassion and empathy for people in other countries. So I think we have a lot of work to do. And I would say it's probably the most important thing we should focus on. And of course, that's what the World Social Summit is saying. And that's what our common agenda is saying, is that we have to go back to basics. And the real basics here for humanity is global citizen education.
Absolutely. And plus, we have a lot of discussions around skills, much less around ethical values, sustainability. And I want to ask a couple of questions. Follow-up question, really. How do global citizenship concepts you discussed, empathy, respect for diversity, access, I would put this into a list of core values, because without access, we cannot really discuss global citizenship education. So how do global citizenship concepts influence partnerships, policies, and the science policy interface in achieving the SDGs? And then how has your global academic experience, and by global I mean internationally oriented, collaborating with colleagues worldwide, informed your approach to education for sustainable development and global citizenship?
Yeah. So I'm going to tell you two driving forces for a partnership that we talked about in Dubai, so just to say that the Academy, we've put together content and courses, and we have our Mission 4.7 project with the Ban Ki-moon Center and with UNESCO. So we believe in lifelong learning and Mission 4.7. And to be fair, we have courses, and we had, you know, a milestone of 1 million learners a couple of weeks ago, and we're not even tracing those that are using our videos in universities or governments or corporates, because they're Creative Commons license, so we don't know who exactly is using them from our library. But you know, 1 million or 2 million is not 1 billion or 7 billion. I mean, you know, so like how could we in some ways get access or content to everyone who needs it? And it's a big challenge, right? But a couple of things influence me. When people, even before the digital age, when people maybe don't have a particularly peaceful household, or it's not easy to study, or they're not in school, there's lots of stories of kids going to libraries, where it's a community space, a safe space, and where they actually can get access to books, and also school books and school homeworks and exercises. And libraries, if you think about it, is I don't have money to buy a book, but I can lend 3 books a week, and then I can give them back. And it's a very nice concept, right? So I also had experience in what's called Diamond Publications. And I was aware that libraries have a thing called a digital repository. It's called DSpace at the time when I was aware of it. And if there was a if I want to give education and resources as a digital public good, like how would I actually use a global digital public infrastructure or highway? And the answer is it exists. It's called public libraries. They transfer content every day freely between each other all over the world. They know how to harvest, they know how to archive, to preserve, to metadata, to license under principles of fair, findable, interoperable, accessible, reusable. And I said, that is interesting. Is it possible that we could give open education resources? And all countries around the world have signed up to giving kids free open education resources in 2019 under the UNESCO OER recommendation. And of course, that content is the SDGs, and also it's the values for global citizenship. So we talked about, could we, under UNESCO and with libraries and academics in a partnership, is it really possible under the public sphere that we could actually give our courses and our content, and we could actually put it in a digital folder, license it, quality assure it, and actually send it to every library in the world, and with AI allow it to be translated and repurposed in any way we want. And most importantly, there's a network out there of libraries talking about knowledge equity, and they say the important thing is as well is that with Indigenous knowledge or knowledge that needs to be digitalized, that there has to be an opportunity for everyone to put their knowledge into a digital repository and then shared in a global knowledge commons, right? So it's not just access to knowledge, it's also the right to create knowledge, and the knowledge that's appropriate for your own country and your own culture and your own history. Because what's out there at the moment is very biased to the English language, but also very biased to particular ways of thinking in education, which is not appropriate, right?
Very much westernized, Western-oriented, particularly.
Exactly. So that was the big project that UNESCO, SDSN, and the MBRF, who was a host of this conference here in Dubai, that in a knowledge hub, I think it's possible with open licensing, with what we call diamond engagements, where we actually can create content for free and we can actually disseminate it to all the libraries of the world. So at least as a first step, that sort of capacity is there to supply and to access knowledge, but you can keep it in the public sphere. It's actually done by public servants, either through academia, through libraries, or through governments. Because to be honest with you, when we were in Nairobi at the consultation of the Summit of the Future with Civil Society, I did not like the language around digital skills and digital literacy. It was as if, teach your grandparents and children how to use the internet and stuff, right? No, digital skills and literacy is that the public sector has to be able to create its own open sourced AI. It should be able to create its own digital assets, its own digital public infrastructures, and it should ensure in the digital space and with the opportunities AI that this gives the opportunity for universal access to digital resources. And even though you might say, well, not everyone has a laptop, not everyone gets on the internet, there's a digital divide of 50%. If you actually say who has access to a library, and who has internet access, then you reduce that down to about 80%. In other words,
Absolutely.
80% would have access. So this is the sort of thinking that's happening with SDSN, that we want to try and be ambitious and just to see, focus maybe on the digital licensing and open source technologies within the public sphere using digital infrastructure to say, well, could we really have a global platform to allow people to supply global citizen content and what we call open education resources? And would it be possible to try and give everyone a chance to access and contribute to that sort of information? I know it's ambitious, but I do think the Digital Global Compact,
definitely needed.
Yeah, we definitely need it. And the Digital Global Compact in Annex 1 of Summit of the Future talks about this. Because they did take it on board that yes, there has to be education as a digital public good, and there should be digital public infrastructures where there is this sort of the right to supply and the right to access information. But we were trying to look at the possibility of a partnership to do that, and hopefully ed tech people and AI people would come behind us, and they would say this is a good initiative, and the private, in other words, would support a public initiative like this.
Absolutely. Access is core and emerges in this conversation nicely. I want to ask you a last question. It's a challenging one. And the question is, how would you define global citizenship education using three keywords, and why these three keywords? I know it's a challenging one, but very interesting because it sort of captures the essence of our discussion today, your experiences, and generally speaking, it offers food for thoughts.
Yeah, well, I think to me, it's always just so simple. I mean, you have to value nature and value people. It's as simple as that, you know.
Yeah, valuing nature and people.
Yeah, and it seems very simple.
Why these two important concepts?
Well, even when I think of licensing, and even when I think of OI or AI, artificial intelligence, and AI, I just say, could we program it? And I know we can. There's and metadata, which is in libraries, the metadata is the taxonomies and the identifiers of what content is and how it should be used, etc. Right? But I think you can put those type of values in. I actually think that you can insist that there has to be care for people and care for nature in your licensing, and also in AI and AI, yeah, and also in what's the one I'm missing is the metadata that you'd actually put into the system. And you might think that's a little crazy, right? But a lot, let's say licensing and intellectual property. So many of the experts and the lawyers want you to own your intellectual property, to make sure that you extract the most money you can from it and that others do not steal it or they disrespect your property, right? But actually, maybe some of us create an asset where we want to share it and we don't want to charge anyone. And we actually want to create assets that we'd never want to be used if there was a war or it would actually hurt nature. You can write those values into licensing. And it's the same with programming AI. So I think we do want robots to be different to humans. Humans have shown themselves to be quite destructive to society and to nature. So when we design the artificial intelligence, we actually want it to be very non-human and actually always work out exactly how it's intendedly or unintendedly having an impact on people and on nature in any part of the world, whether it's close to you or not close to your home. So I do think that that it is possible to put those values into into licensing, into infrastructures, into the DNA, if you like, of how innovation and investment is done. I think it's possible. The problem is that we're not doing that. And then the consequences are very clear to us, that we have these dystopian futures in terms of biodiversity loss, climate change, geopolitical problems, increased, inequality, education inequality, lack of access. So, I mean, it's a very simple thing. And of course, the beauty of care for people, care for nature is actually a principle in all religions in this world. And I would like to think it's also a principle in any secular person, that you do not want to make money, or you do not want to live your life where you knowingly are damaging nature and damaging somebody else. Why would you be that person? And somehow our governance systems, our technology systems, our financial systems, even the way we buy clothes, even the way we eat food, somehow we are all part of driving an agenda that does exactly the opposite.
Exactly. All right. Thank you very much, Patrick Walsh, full professor and chair of international development studies at University College Dublin, vice president of education and director of the SDG Academy, UN Sustainable Development Solutions Network. A real pleasure to have this conversation with you. Very, very interesting one. Thank you.
Thank you.